Hi, I'm Paul LeBlanc, and I was president at Marlboro College 20 years ago when we created the Graduate Center. And I guess my first thought is, how did 20 years go by so quickly? It feels like yesterday that we began that work. But it's a pleasure to join you. I wish I wasn't halfway around the world. I'd love to be there with you. I'm in New Zealand as you listen to me. But it's great, and congratulations. So let me reflect back a little bit about the start of the Grad Center. I mean, you've all heard this phrase that creativity craves constraint. And in some ways, Marlboro is a college that has always had to be scrappy. It's had to be thoughtful and innovative. It's not a wealthy place. So at the time, we were thinking about how do we think about new programs? How do we expand the toolkit that we had to bring to bear? We had been undergraduate programming only, so we thought graduate education would be a place we could think about expanding our efforts. And we were looking at where there was need. And at the time, it's hard to think about this now in the world in which we live, but at the time, the internet was just taking off. And we were still talking about web browsers, and people were still, I think, maybe using Mosaic and things that we don't even think about today. But it was clear to us that there was no institution out there with programming to help people think about how do I build my businesses leveraging this new technology, or how do I rethink K-12 education leveraging this new technology. And that led to quite literally the first degree in e-commerce. We didn't quite call it that. And it was the first Masters of Arts in Teaching, an MAT degree, in using the internet in the classroom. And that was really breakthrough. We got enormous amounts of attention, whether it was the Atlantic magazine, sort of the higher ed press, et cetera. And we tried to create a new space, away from the main campus up on the hill down in Brattleboro. We bought this great building with help from some supportive philanthropy. And when we created a kind of WeWork space 20 years before anybody knew what WeWork was and before it existed. So it was an innovative space with innovative programs at a time when there was market need. And it gave Marlboro at the time some new revenue source, an expanded repertoire, if you will, as we tried to figure out how to make this scrappy little place successful. I think we find ourselves today in a perfect storm puts this in a pejorative light, and I don't quite mean it that way, but we're going through enormous change in higher education and in the workforce. So if you think about the impacts of automation and AI on the nature of work, what jobs will be displaced, what jobs will be created, those are pretty murky waters for us today. There are sort of alarmist perspectives that suggest that as many as high as 55% of current jobs will disappear. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I sit on the Academy of Sciences board on workforce and higher ed, and we certainly are spending a lot of time thinking about the changing nature of work. Even if you are in a job 5 years from now, the same job 5 years from now, that job will change out from under you because of the velocity of change, because of new technologies, et cetera. And while certainly we have seen with every new technological paradigm shift, displacement of work and the creation of new jobs, the difference here is that those new jobs may or may not be done by humans. And we'll certainly all have algorithmic co-workers. So we have to think about what does that look like. If I use the analogy of agriculture, probably 50 years ago, we produced less sort of produce product with about 40% of the population. Today it's about 4% of the population producing much more than we produced then. So you took fewer people who were much more capable because of technological advances. Is something like that going to happen for most of our jobs? So again, this is not an apocalyptic vision. It is everyone I think who's paying attention recognizes that enormous changes are underway, largely driven by technology. On the other hand, we also know that new possibilities occur, and that's true for our field as well. So in higher education, we're thinking about all the ways we can now provide support, we can serve more people. We have a tremendous numbers challenge in higher education. We will not produce enough people with undergraduate degrees. And we know we have to tackle that challenge. We know we have an equity challenge. So we have seen completion or graduation go up for the top 3 quartiles of income in America. But after 25 years of investment, we haven't even moved the dial on the poorest quartile. So same completion rates as we saw 25 years ago, at a time when more jobs require a college degree and where we see greater inequity in the country. So we've got some pretty big challenges in higher education. People's business models are being blown up. The cost of an education is further and further out of reach of students. People don't want to take on the debilitating loan. Because of those workforce changes I mentioned, they're very unclear about their ROI, if I can use that phrase, for education. So I want to be able to do this for my kid. My kid wants it, but is this a job that will actually exist? Is this something they can put to work? So enormous challenges. I think the good news for a place like Marlboro is that it may be that the things that are going to be most valuable in that future that I described to you will be distinctly human values and skills and talents like creativity and meaning making, critical thinking, ethical thinking, and reasoning. These are all talents and skills associated with the liberal arts and with the humanities. And there is one version of the future where we see a kind of renaissance of the humanities and the liberal arts in a way that they've been under siege over the last 30 years. So for Marlboro, there could be a newfound relevance in the work it does, because those may be the things that we value most in our culture. So I began by saying that Marlboro has always been scrappy and inventive, and I think that remains the case. The Graduate Center looks very different than it did 20 years ago when I started that effort, and I think that's a good thing. I find reassurance in that fact. If it looked like it did 20 years ago, it'd probably be a very bad sign that it's getting stale. So I think I applaud the changes that have been underway, and there's certainly been an evolution of the programs and what's being studied. And I think what I value most about a Marlboro education are the things that I think are so needed in charting a course through this sort of uncertain future. And that combination of scrappiness, inventiveness, and a willingness to change, I think are going to be probably the tools of great institutional resiliency. And a lot of schools unwilling to change, always kind of looking in the rear view mirror as opposed to looking ahead. There's a kind of vulnerability, I fear, for many of our peer institutions. I think Marlboro is in a very different place, and with Kevin's leadership and Kate at the Grad Center, you've got great people, and I think part of the genius of what we did before is we allowed people to be engaged or not, as they may be. So you had faculty like Mark Francelon and Jim Mahoney who threw themselves into that work, and then others that said, no thanks, I got busy enough over here. And I think that ability to comfortably hold both those kinds of programming together was actually a strength then and a strength today. So congratulations. Looking forward to another great 20 years for the Graduate Center. Really proud of that initial work, and even more proud with what you all have done with it since I was there.